It is time to stop being afraid of reasonable adjustments. Let me explain what they are and why they're actually a really helpful term. Welcome to the Dyslexia in Adults podcast, where we share advice on what works with dyslexia to ensure that you're able to achieve your potential. You won't believe this, but we just hit 100,000 downloads. So to make sure that we're able to share this advice with even more people, we would really appreciate it if you could just leave us a review or share this episode with a friend. But more importantly, we have a very special secret gift as a thank you for listening in the show notes. I cannot tell you how many times someone has stopped me and said, but what are reasonable adjustments? Like, what's reasonable and what can I ask for? Whenever I'm out and I'm telling someone what my job is, and if they are dyslexic, I guarantee the first question they will ask me is, what can I ask for at work? What is okay to ask for? And in the UK, we have a concept called reasonable adjustments. And that is what the law says that we are allowed to ask for as someone who is covered under the Equality Act. But reasonable adjustments, not the clearest term to understand what you can get and what you can't. So let's dive in. Okay, so when you're trying to understand reasonable adjustments, it actually doesn't have to be that complicated. Basically, it is something at work that will help you achieve your best or do something that will mean you're more capable at work. And what we're just asking for is to ensure that it isn't an arduous or unreasonable request. So maybe reasonable is a bit confusing, but try and flip it around as it's not absolutely ridiculously shocking request. And if you haven't listened to our episode where we spoke to a lawyer on the law and case law and what has been denoted as reasonable or not, you will be shocked as what is to allowed. But if we think about it in a more dyslexic friendly way, what we're trying to basically think about is the term reasonable has been put in there because what you need and what I need is very different. We wouldn't all be put on the same pair of glasses. When you go to the opticians, you're not trying to all wear the same type of glasses. No, you go there and you figure out what works, what you can see, what each eye needs, and then you buy a pair of glasses accordingly. So is the same with reasonable adjustments. It feels scary that there isn't a set of list of things you can ask for, but we have to start seeing it as a positive that we can make things personalized to us, get what we really need. So what I thought I would do today is I would take a topic that I know so many of you are really struggling with, and that is procrastination. And how do I know that you're struggling with it? Because I'm struggling with it too. So if day after day you are finding yourself sat there taking ages to get started on a task, or you're feeling like you are climbing a mountain to just get through all of your work, then I want to give you some very reasonable adjustments that you can ask for to help you get started with your work. Because this isn't you being a problem. This is the way that your brain is structured. And just hoping that you can just do it or just get started is not going to work. It's going to leave you exhausted and frustrated. So here are some adjustments that will help. The first one is creating mini deadlines. Contriving deadlines and ways that you have to submit things can be really helpful to get started and to ensure that you're moving. So you can say to your boss, what's the deadline for this? Or when do I need to get this done by? And if they say, oh, whenever, it is okay to push back and say, do you know what? I really need a deadline. Or I really need a check-in halfway through the week to make sure I'm working through things. You shouldn't need to alone push yourself. And then secondly, a planning meeting. If you need once a week a planning meeting to sit down and think about breaking down all of your tasks, understanding when everything is going to get done, making sure that you're then creating deadlines for that, that is completely reasonable. And again, backed by law. And then thirdly and finally, a check-in. So maybe at the end of the week, you need someone to say, what have you got done? Where are you at with this? Something simple like that, again, completely reasonable and can be so helpful to make sure that you move forward with your day and you have that overview of what's been done and what hasn't. All of these things, you may be sitting there thinking, oh, but it's going to take time out of their day and I feel like such a burden. But these are completely reasonable adjustments. So how do we kind of deal with that feeling of being a burden. Let's jump into the reframe of how we want to think about this. I'm going to give it to you straight. If you are sat there thinking that you need to work 120% to get something started and to get through your day, that is not creating your best. That is not helping you achieve what you need to achieve. And you have to understand the impact that is having to you on how tired you are, how frustrated you are experiencing things. So we have to think about things. Instead of you doing 110% of the work, we have to start thinking about it in terms of how can we gain support. So as a dyslexic person, I know you want to take on all the responsibility. I know you want to work hard. But why don't we think of it as you doing 80% of the work? You're going to do all of the project work. You're going to turn up to the meeting planned. You're going to think about everything you need to do. And then you're going to take 20% as a reasonable adjustment for your employer or your boss to sit there and say, okay, let me see what your plan is this week. Let me see if there's any holes. And just the act of that meeting can help you process and make sure you actually do that planning time. Do you see how you are still taking on all of the responsibility, but there is just a small, reasonable amount of support that you are getting? So I want you to think about it in terms of the 80-20 rule of what is reasonable, and to reframe that voice in your head that is keeping you stuck and keeping you frustrated by making you feel like you're a burden. It is time to stop going 120% with your workload. It is not helping. It is not making things easier. So how do we switch that mentality from feeling like a burden to actually utilizing reasonable adjustments? I want you to think about it in terms of the 80-20 rule. We are trying to set up structures and systems that mean that you are going to do your best. And so that means getting support. So as dyslexic people, I know you love to be doing all of the work, feeling like you're working hard, feeling like you're the one putting all of the effort. But I want you to think about taking on 80% of that and then allowing someone to take on a reasonable 20% that it will allow you to really work through things successfully and quickly. So again, when we go back to that prioritization piece, you are turning up to the meeting. You are planning out what you need to do. You are doing all of the work. All you need is a weekly meeting to allow you to focus and plan out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and make sure that you know next week someone's going to check up on what you've done. And that deadline and that planning space is only 20%. It is completely reasonable. Okay, so to recap, I want you to start seeing reasonable adjustments as not this scary term that you're like, oh, I just don't know what it means and I don't know what I can ask for. I want you to start thinking about it's the opportunity to personalize the support that you need. And also, I want you to realize that most of the things that you are asking for, in fact, I have never heard of anything that isn't reasonable. So start realizing that the stuff you're asking for is reasonable, and giving 120% of the role is not serving you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Dyslexia in Adults podcast. Whether or not this is your first listen or your 100th, I am so grateful that you decided to entrust me with this challenge. If you enjoyed this week's episode, I would really appreciate it if you could review and subscribe to the podcast, because it really helps us to reach more people.